the Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 13th chapter. Now Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites! Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things he was doing. The Gospel of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Please join me in prayer. Good and gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be acceptable to you, God. For you, God, are our constant rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Hi, Avery. Shout out to Avery over there. So I'm barefoot up here, as y'all can probably see. And that's because earlier this week I injured my foot. Let me take off my mask. So earlier this week I injured my foot. I hit it really hard on something in my apartment, and I may have broken it, I'm not sure. The people in the first service told me I need to go to the doctor, but we'll get to that, you know how we are with doctors sometimes. But it made it very difficult for me to walk. It was an excruciating pain. And I couldn't drive my car because, as you see, it's on my right foot, and so that's the foot that you use to operate your car. So I had to cancel my plans this week. I had to stay home all week, or for 2 days. I had to cancel my plans on Thursday night and on Friday afternoon, the plans that I had with my friends. And as I sat around my apartment, I tried to see what I could learn from this injury. I don't believe that God gives us injuries to teach us something. I don't believe God uses our inabilities to do something or our physical ailments to make us grow. These, in my opinion, are harmful theologies. These are harmful ways to experience God. Yet I decided to see if I could find something in this injury because I knew I was sermon writing, and so you're kind of like looking at everything when you're in sermon writing mode. As I examined this injury, I saw how this pain was giving me a glimpse into the experience of the woman in our gospel. It was making it difficult for me to walk. It was keeping me isolated alone in my apartment. It kept me from going out with friends. It kept me from my community. It lessened my quality of life. Yet this was only for a few days. I'm sure we can all relate to experiencing pain. From backaches to headaches, from minor to chronic pain, we all experience some type of pain occasionally or live with it every day. While this story from the gospel focuses specifically on a physical ailment, it is important to note that the crux of this story is both what results from the ailment and the conditions that perpetuate the ailment. The ways that pain can isolate us from community, and also the ways that systems throughout society and institutions perpetuate the pain that so many people experience. There are many types of pain. In addition to physical, there is mental pain like extreme stress, depression, and anxiety, to name a few. There's emotional pain like grief, shame, and heartbreak. And then there's spiritual pain, the pain we feel when we aren't treated like human beings, and also the pain we feel when we treat others as if they are less than we are. The woman in this story is probably feeling all of these: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual pain. And through a word and a touch, Jesus liberates her from all of it. I, like some of you, can relate to this woman in many other ways than just my toe. I can relate to her feelings of being on the outside. I relate to her feelings of isolation, of being marginalized, to my deeper pain of being inconvenient to some people, to being a source of conflict. The story is presented to us in the Gospel of Luke, and the writer of Luke is presumed to be a doctor, so it's no wonder that he chooses to focus on so many healing stories, many of which occur on the Sabbath. And with these healings taking place on the Sabbath, there is usually conflict. In the commentary in Flesh, theologian Damon Garcia writes, Luke makes a point to detail the conflict that always comes with Jesus' healings. His healings always had a political dimension that put him in conflict with religious authorities, because the author understood healing as a challenge to leaders who prolonged people's suffering by marginalizing them prior to their healing. Prolonged people's suffering by marginalizing them prior to their healing. End quote. I want to be clear about something. This conflict is not just against religious authorities. This is not against Jewish leaders. The healings of Jesus come into conflict with any authorities who hold people hostage within systems of oppression. These systems of oppression occur in many institutions which we are all intricately connected in. Anytime an institution decides to perpetuate ideologies where some benefit and others suffer, any institution that perpetuates crimes against human beings, any institution that chooses to divide instead of unite, that chooses to ignore the pain of others because it inconveniences them, that can happen within government institutions, medical institutions, educational institutions, and sadly, within church institutions as well. We as Christians are constantly being invited by the Spirit to examine how we fall into these traps and patterns, where we use language that is harmful to others, where we hold beliefs that exclude some and include others, beliefs where some benefit and others are harmed. We are constantly being invited by the Spirit of God to examine these beliefs, to examine these ways of speaking and thinking and writing, to notice the ways that we deny, ignore, or actively abuse the humanity in others. Jesus is constantly inviting us into this work. And as we examine these ideologies, we are bound to make some people upset. We are bound to face conflict. The people in this passage are upset with Jesus for healing this woman on the Sabbath day. They are using rules to their advantage that benefit some and harm others. It's tidy and clean to have specific rules to control society. I'm sure these people thought, can't we just have one day where we don't have to see suffering? Can't we have one day where we're not confronted by other people's pain? Where we can pretend like everything is just fine? This woman's pain inconvenienced them. We often think this way as well. We don't want to be inconvenienced by other people's pain. We want to ignore the pain that is all around us. This is the same reason why we have anti-panhandling laws, no loitering laws, and no public camping laws. Why certain sections of the city don't have bus access or even sidewalks. Why would people want to be reminded that other people have less than they do? Why would people want to see people who are unhoused, who are impoverished, who have recognizable mental health needs, who are hungry? It makes most people uncomfortable to see those people in their neighborhoods, near their nice restaurants, their places of employment, their houses of worship. So we make laws to keep people far away from us so that we can ignore their pain, people whose pain we cannot ignore. Theologian Joy J. Moore says, every law is not just because it's legal. Does not make it right. Let me repeat that. Every law is not just because it's legal does not make it right. When Jesus does something that is liberating for another, someone is put to shame because of that act of generosity that Jesus has extended. We might have a law that we are willing to follow, but the right thing to do might be gracious to someone else. And in that grace, we will cause the shame of someone who thinks they're doing the legal thing, end quote. Sometimes the generous thing is not the thing that follows the rules. It's not the gracious thing. But the thing about grace is that it breaks all of the rules. It breaks all of the rules by giving love to all of those who need it. I don't think that these people who brought up the rules of the Sabbath were bad people. They, like so many of us, just didn't want to be uncomfortable. These rules were in place for a reason, and they helped people compartmentalize their lives and continue ignoring the needs of those around them, those they kept far outside of their community. But on this particular day, this woman would not be ignored. Instead, they would all be forced to see her as Jesus acknowledged her, as Jesus called her forward, touched her back, and healed her. In this healing, Jesus liberates this woman by untying what she is bound to. He restores her humanity by touching her, and he restores her identity as a daughter of Abraham. This woman's 18 years of bondage would have reminded the people there of their 18 years of affliction in Moab and from the Philistines and Ammonites. It would have reminded them of their ancestors' years of enslavement in Egypt. Damon Garcia writes, Israel's history is filled with bondage and liberation again and again, going all the way back to Exodus. That history was central to the identities of everyone in that synagogue with Jesus that day, end quote. This is the true reason for the Sabbath. It is a day to stop working, to rest, and this day was created by God to give rest to those who are not usually given it, recognizing this is how we restore the Sabbath. God gave the people the commandment to follow the Sabbath. He gave that to the Israelites during their time of exodus from enslavement in Egypt. It was to be a day that continued to be practiced out of response to the Israelites' repeated enslavement. The repeated enslavement under empires that subjugated, oppressed them, and forced them into working long, restless hours. Our passage today from Isaiah tells us what is involved in a true Sabbath. It reads, "If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then you will be practicing the Sabbath. Then you will be doing the will of God. Then you will be overcoming evil with goodness." The Sabbath is a day when we are invited into remembering how far God has brought us, removing the yoke of enslavement from those who are marginalized and practice freeing others. The Sabbath is not the Sabbath if all are not free. This is why Jesus calls these people hypocrites. They know better. They know that this rule was created in order to provide liberation, but they are using it to keep someone else enslaved. They are using it to benefit themselves, but to harm those who are further subjugated, the women, the ill, the impoverished in their society. When we read passages like this one, where Jesus uses a strong language and speaks out boldly, when he calls people hypocrites or vipers, or the passage we read last week, which Pastor Athena preached from, when Jesus said he came to bring division, not peace, these passages sometimes mess with our ideas of who we think Jesus is, or more accurately, who we've created Jesus to be. We think there's a difference between this image we have of Jesus as the good shepherd, the one who is always loving and gentle with his lambs. We pit this image against someone like the one we read about today, the confrontational one, the radical rabble-rouser, the one who is flipping tables in the temple. But these are the same Jesus. The problem is our society has equated love with meekness and calm and quiet. We've equated love with letting things slide and not speaking up, with being non-confrontational, with everyone getting along. But those are not the ways of love. Love seeks what is best for its beloved. Love seeks what is true, what is good, what is just. The Good Shepherd is the radical rabble-rouser. His goodness is in his boldness. It's in his confrontation towards those who hold their power over others, his confrontation of those who rule others and oppress, who choose their own comfort over others' deliverance, who twist the meanings of laws in order to benefit themselves. Jesus is the Good Shepherd for those who need radical liberation, for those on the margins. The Good Shepherd cares for his sheep, fights for his sheep, and protects his sheep. And when we do these things, we are the face of Jesus as well. And this is how Jesus brings us out of isolation into community. He brings us out of our pain into loving relationship with one another, restoring the humanity of those who have been pushed outside of society through poverty, lack of access to health care, and simply through systems that choose to see them based on their identities as less than human. The radical rabble-rouser, Good Shepherd, restores his sheep into all healing and into true liberation, then and always. Amen.